Double honors to the apostles and elders who rule well, and salutations to the Akim who are doing this work for our sake in truth and sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth, and salutations to the Aquathium for whom these videos are meant. Today I'd like to talk about marriage and what it means to become one flesh. Ephesians 5:31. For this cause shall the man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Matthew 19:5. And said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. The word to cleave means to adhere to cling to. So a man leaves his family to become one, if he so chooses to marry, to become one flesh with his wife. And how do you become one flesh? Spiritually, for my husband and I, this was a huge part of him courting me. For a couple months, all we did was meet at Dunkin' Donuts and have coffee, read tons of scriptures. He wooed me with his teaching, and I wooed him with my desire to know my heritage. I always wanted to know who I was, where I came from. I'm so-called Puerto Rican, and I always knew bits and pieces of our history, but I always had this innate desire to know who I was, where I came from. And when my husband came along and he was able to answer a lot of those questions for me, it totally wooed me. So as I prepared myself to be one with him, I read everything I could about being a single woman, a married woman, a good mother, a virtuous woman, a submissive woman, and so on and so forth. And the more I read and studied, and the more I was around him, I began to do those things that I had been reading about, as well as the things that he suggested to me. And so spiritually, Yahweh wants us to be of one accord, to be like-minded. Philippians 2:2. Fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. And that's what we did. When we were out there reading scriptures, communing with one another, we were becoming like-minded. We were being of one accord. We were becoming of one mind. And it was all spiritual. Absolutely, I'm sure there were some lustful feelings between he and I. He's a good-looking man. I'm a good-looking woman. There were some lustful feelings. But we were able to get past that and just work on the spiritual part. The second way to become spiritually one with someone is to speak to each other in psalms and hymns. Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Hamashiach dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And that's what we did when we got together and we were able to read scriptures to one another. He was filling me with wisdom, and we were teaching and admonishing one another. Was I teaching him about the scriptures and history and whatnot? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But there were things along the way that I guess I could say by accident my husband learned from me. Nothing's by accident though, right? Everything is Yahweh's will. And so that was the spiritual piece of us becoming one flesh. Physically, people become one flesh by sex. So all this sex before marriage and all this other stuff of this world is not so. Once you have sex, you are married. And it clearly states that in Genesis 24:67. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. It's clear as day. It's clear as day. It tells you there. Isaac brought her, speaking of Rebekah, into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. I don't know the exact history, but I'm sure there was a process. I'm sure the going into the mother's tent was a process. And they had to come out with something to say, hey, this is good. She's a virgin. They are married. They're together. And so once you've become physical with the man and you are his wife, right, you've entered into a covenant. You've entered into a covenant via intercourse. And what is a covenant? A covenant is a treaty, an alliance, a constitution, an agreement, a pledge. So once you've done it, it's done. You can't enter in and out of a covenant all willy-nilly. How would you feel if Yahushua said, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you the kingdom. If you do this, if you do that, we have a deal. This is what it's going to be. Boom. And then he come back and say, gotcha. How would you feel? It's the same thing. Once you've entered into a covenant, you have to deal with that person. Another ox said in one of the videos, once you marry, you have to deal with that person because there's no putting them away. Unless, of course, under specific circumstances. If I'm not mistaken, the two are if a woman sleeps with another man, her husband has all right to put her away. Or if a man is not providing the 3 essentials required of a man in marriage, which are food, clothing, and shelter, and conjugal duties. That's it, ladies. That's what you all are here for. Well, not that's what you all are here for, but that's what we get. And that's enough. That's enough, especially if your husband chooses to teach you. If he chooses to bring you into the fold and go over the scriptures with you. Now, you will have husbands who like to keep the two separate. And that's fine too. If that's how your husband is, then that's what you need to go along with. But remember, once you have entered into that covenant with your husband, there's no turning back. I hope that this was edifying. It's just a, quick snippet. Until next time, Akyam and Akwatyam. Yahweh Bashem Yashai Barakatam.